Roxanne, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's Flood Risk Management Committee meeting. I declare the meeting open at 4:30 p.m. The Council acknowledges the traditional custodian of the land on which this meeting is being held as that of the Bidjigal people of the Eora Nation. Staff and public are reminded that this meeting is being recorded for minute-taking purposes and is also being webcast live on Council's website. This recording will be made available on Council's website. Staff and public are reminded that this meeting is open and the meeting is being broadcast live to the public on Council's website in accordance with Section 4 of Council's Code of Meeting Practice. Only if the meeting moves into a closed confidential session in accordance with Section 13 of the Code of Meeting Practice will the public broadcasting of the meeting be suspended. Council's Code of Meeting Practice prohibits electronic recording of meetings without the express permission of Council. I do have received one apology from Dan Freebody from Transport for New South Wales. Do we have any other apologies?
Yes, we have one other apology from David Grasby from Sydney Water.
David, what was that, David?
Grasby.
Grasby, yes, sorry. Okay, so we have David Grasby from Sydney Water. If there's no other apologies, can someone move that the apologies be accepted? Can I say moved by David or Mr. Milner? Is that right? Who do we have online? I don't know who we have online, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's a bit difficult, Councillor Hindi. It's just Roxanne speaking now. We might do a bit of a roll call if you're okay with that, Councillor Hindi.
Yep.
There we go. So moved by Andrew Goodsell, but after this we might take a roll call, Councillor Hindi.
Yep.
Yes, moved by Andrew Goodsell. Do we have a seconder?
Roxanne, I think we just need to establish who the guests are in the participants list.
There's a whole heap of them there. So
I can see somebody here, the list that's on the the agenda.
Councillor Hindi, how would you like us to ascertain the attendees at tonight? Would you like me to go through who we believe to be on the committee, and then we can cross off anyone that we don't account for on the side of the participants list? Yeah,
that's fine. Do we have that? Are we going to have that list somewhere live?
If the minute taker could just scroll up to there we go.
Oh, good. Okay.
So if we could maybe go down the list there.
Yeah, industry and community members. Is anyone out of the industry and community members, are they all here or is anyone missing? Put it this way. Or we don't know till we go around, is that what we're saying?
Yeah, I think we go around, Councillor Hindi. Okay. So just basically just call them out one by one for them to acknowledge their attendance would be great.
Yeah,
I do note that we've got extra people online though, so we may need to ask after you've finished this section, Councillor Hindi, just for others to make themselves known.
Okay, we'll do that. You want me to go through it or you're going to go through it, Roxanne? I'm
happy either way, Councillor Hindi. It's up to you.
If you can go through, I'm happy to go through it to get used to the name.
All right, sure.
Ms. Vera Wayne, SES, Planning and Research Officer. That online? Not present, I presume. Okay.
If you are present when Councillor Hindi calls your name, if you could just unmute yourself and just sort of say yes, that would be great.
Okay, so Ms. Kira's not there. David Grasby is already an apology. Sadak Zaman is...
Yes, I'm here.
That's good. Ms. Donna Curman. No. Basically, out of that, we've only got one person available. We got to council staff. Moody.
Yes, I'm present.
Right. Ms. McMahon. Okay, not present. Ms. Priyani Jayawira.
Yes, I am present, Councillor.
That's great. Thank you. Mr. David Milner is about.
Yes, I'm present, and sorry, there was a late apology from Mr. Sasha Marasievek from Canterbury Council.
Oh, Canterbury Council. It's not on that list, is it? Okay, we'll also accept that apology as well.
Thank you.
We'll have that apology accepted. Then we'll go to Mr. Mazen Eltzurk.
Yes, I'm present here.
Good, thank you. Mr. Andrew Goodsell.
Yes, I'm present.
That's good, thank you. Roxanne Thornton is present, thank you. Ms. Marina Kavar, present.
She is present, Mr. Chair. She's taking the minutes today.
Okay, good. Consultants, Ms. Erin Escube.
I will mention too. Can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Hello, this is Mr. Lachlan Prentice, Senior Environment Officer, GRC staff. I'm also present.
Okay. All right. All right. Well,
Erin is present, and Erin, we've just unmuted you.
Excuse me, Mr. Councillor.
Yep.
So this is Asad Shuman from Canterbury Bankstown Council is also present.
Good, thank you.
Mr. Councillor, this is Firoz Ahmed, Senior Development Engineer from the Georges River Council. I'm also present.
Thank you.
And Beth Salt from Georges River Keeper is also present. Sorry, I was having audio issues before.
Thank you. Can we have those names added if they're not there already?
And Councillor Hindi, Andrew Ladder, Director of Assets and Infrastructure, is also present.
Welcome, Andrew. Thank you. Okay. Do we have anybody?
I note that we have a Peter Jinke.
Okay.
Pulak Saha.
Where's that from?
I'm not sure. Peter, are you able to say where you're from?
New South Wales State Emergency Service.
Thank you, Peter. Pulak Saha.
I'm from Bayside Council.
From Bayside, thank you, Pulak.
Thank you.
Richard Dewar, have we already said your name, Richard? Apologies.
No.
Richard Dewar, if you're able just to unmute yourself and let us know where you're from for today, just for the minutes.
Yeah, I'm here.
Thank you, Richard. And where are you from?
WMA Water.
WMA, thank you. Sarath Danton. Sarath, are you there? If we could just mark it down, minute taker, that there is a Sarath Danton also present, and we may just investigate as to where Sarak is from.
Thank you. Anybody else? Look, if as people come along, we can add the names. I probably need Roxanne's help a bit when it comes to the moving and seconding a bit to make sure that we get it right. But apart from that, welcome everyone to the meeting, since that we've got everyone, and anybody else that joins us, then they can unmute themselves and let us know, and we go from there. So we've discussed the apologies. We've got 3 apologies which we have moved. We're trying to move in second. We said now we're looking for a mover and a seconder, since we've got all the names. Who would like to move and would like to second?
Just for clarification there, Councillor Hindi.
Yep.
So for voting purposes under the terms of reference, the mover or seconder should be from yourself as the chair, the SES, which we've got Peter online, Office of Environment and Heritage, which we've got SEDEC online, or the community representative, which I believe is Aaron Sellers, but I'm not sure that we've confirmed that he's online. So you need a mover or a seconder from those
All right.
groups.
I'm happy to move it. I'll move the apology, and we'll have Peter or SEDEC to. Can't hear anyone.
Yeah, I'm here, Councillor Hindi. Yeah.
Is that Sadek or?
Yes, Sadiq Zaman.
Okay, thank you. Sadek Zaman, that's fine. Moved by myself, seconded by Sadek Zaman. I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Against, declare that carried. Do we have any conflict? Does anyone have any conflict of interest so we can have recorded? Probably don't, but the only thing about conflict of interest here is some people live in that area where we're talking about the floodplain risk management thing, and some of them don't know whether their property is going to be impacted or not. But at this stage, we're saying no one's got a conflict on that one. All right, there are no speakers registered to speak at the meeting. Now we move on to the item of confirmation of the previous minutes of the Floodplain Risk Management Committee meeting that was held on the 2nd of November 2020. Can I have a mover to move the adoption of the minutes, please? I'll move the adoption, but I wasn't at the meeting, so you can still do it, but I wasn't at the meeting. So I'll move the adoption. Do we have a second now?
Yeah, I can second. I was in the meeting, like Sadiq Zaman. Yep.
Okay, that's good. So moved by myself, moved by Councillor Hindi, seconded by Sadiq Zaman. Is there any discussion, omission, or alterations? If there's none, I'll put that all in favour, say aye. Against, declare that carried. Let's move on to the item, the only item on the agenda, FRM CC002-21, presentation of the draft Overland Flow floodplain risk management study and plan for Hurstville, Moretown and Hookers Ford. Who's the speaker on that one today? If you don't mind, David Milner, or who's speaking on this item, or who's presenting?
That will be Aaron Askew from WMA.
Yep. Okay, good. So can I hand it over to Aaron Askew to start the presentation? Aaron? I'm just flicking back to our agenda, which is the main one. Let's see the presentation. Hello, Roxanne, do we have Aaron there?
I believe so. Let me just see if I can manually unmute. Is it Erin Sellers that we're wanting to unmute, Councillor Hindi?
No, I thought Aaron Askew.
Aaron Askew, thank you. I've just unmuted Aaron Askew. Aaron, are you there? He's on mobile. Okay, we've got one mobile that seems to be unmuted. Someone's just advised that Aaron Askew is on mobile. And
hello, are you able to hear me? Are you able to hear me now?
We can, yes, thank you.
Okay, wonderful. I'll also need to share my screen. It currently says that screen sharing is disabled.
And do you need that being shared from your mobile connection or from the one that actually has your name?
From the one that has my name.
No worry, that's easy to do. I'll just make you a presenter now.
Okay, thanks.
And Aaron, that should allow you to share now.
Okay, wonderful.
Thank you, Aaron. Over to you, and thank you, Roxanne, for your help there.
Is that working for you, Aaron?
Yeah, I'm just trying to select the program.
Oh, no worries at all.
Yeah. Okay, are you able to see that, everybody?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So today we're just going to talk through the Overland Flow floodplain risk management study for the Hurstville, Mortdale and Peakhurst wards. So these sections of the LGA were part of the former Hurstville LGA. and the flood study for those areas was done a few years ago, and so this management study is just following on from those. It makes for quite a long title, but anyway. So today I'm just going to give a bit of a recap of Overland Flow and what we mean by Overland Flow, a background to the floodplain risk management process, our approach to the study and the recommendations that are coming out of the study, and where to from here. As I just mentioned, it's the Hurstville, Mortdale and Peakhurst wards of the Georges River LGA, but these were part of the former Hurstville local government area. And so as part of this study, we're looking at what's called overland flow. Now, overland flow is generally when the rain falls on the catchment and runs off to the natural or constructed drainage systems. So it's distinctly different from Georges River flooding, for example. Overland flow is typically a very shallow depth. And there doesn't tend to be great scale in the types of events. So when we talk about a 5% annual exceedance probability compared to a 1% annual exceedance probability, the scale between those is not significant. So typically, the flooding sort of scales over about 0.5 metre, whereas if we were talking about Georges River flooding, the scale between those events would be metres. And that's just a function of the type of flood behaviour it is. But what this means is that areas that are inundated, not a whole lot of extra areas come in as we get through larger events. Generally, this type of flooding doesn't cause significant overflow inundation of properties, and that's also due to the shallow nature and the fact that often if a resident notices that water tends to come down their driveway, they'll make localised changes to their property to stop that type of flooding occurring. The other point about overland flow is that it occurs generally really quickly, but disappears very fast as well. Some challenges that we have when we talk about overland flow, because it's really this small scale inundation and, really resulting from a rainfall event, we have challenges with the community often that the term flood means different things to different people. So when I talk about a flood, lots of people think I'm talking about the Georges River flooding, but instead we're talking about these very localised events. Communities often have not a lot of tolerance for flow not fitting in pipes. And so the stormwater network typically is designed for about a 5-year flood event, which is, a very small flood event compared to that 1% AEP, which is a 100-year flood event. So it's a very challenging type of flooding to communicate with the community, because the community often expects there to be no water anywhere anytime it rains. But that tends not to be the case, because, like I just mentioned, the stormwater system, nowhere in Sydney or Australia, for that matter, would have a capacity larger than about a 5-year. We often include in some of our communication material some questions just to help the community to identify whether we're talking about maybe just a localised drainage issue rather than a flooding issue. So I've got some photographs here. There's some leaves blocking this drain here, and that's what we would really call a stormwater issue, not an overland flow issue. And what we found during this study was some of the hotspots or issue locations identified by the community, they really fell into more of this stormwater issue. So some of the recommendations don't necessarily provide a solution to that in as part of this report, but provide a pathway forward for council to do a little bit more localised investigation at those places. I just wanted to cover that off because sometimes
it's Glenn Moody.
Hey, Glenn.
Hi, Aaron. Sorry, we're getting some comments through. We're just having some difficulties viewing the presentation. It's appearing twice on the screen. If you could just try and maximise the presentation image.
Okay. So is it not the, on my screen, it's the full screen. Let me just try and share something else. Are you? Is that a full screen now?
Better than earlier.
That is better now.
It's better, but it's showing the next slide.
Oh, okay.
So it is slightly better. Yeah.
Are you? Sorry, this is IT. Are you running it on 2 screens or just on 1 screen?
Yeah, I've got 2 screens.
Try and see if you can share the screen that's actually showing the slide presentation.
So when I go share screen, there's no option. How do I change the option? Like, how do I?
Just. Is the presentation being shown on your primary desktop or on your secondary screen?
Hang on, just a second, I'll move it. Hang on a sec. Sorry, am I able to not make it my primary? Like, how do I make it share not my primary screen?
I think the best thing you can do is just increase the size of your slide that's on the screen right now, rather than trying to go full screen.
Okay, just the presentation.
Yeah, just make it larger so that people can see it better.
Okay.
Yeah, Aaron, can you actually run through? If you see on the bottom side of your presentation, this is a full mode. Maybe if you click that one.
Yeah, so that's what I'm running, but that's not on my primary screen, and so I don't know how to share the non-primary screen.
This is Roxanne speaking. Hi, Aaron. I'm just going to try something else. If you can go to your, that screen there, and then see the grey options under, there's that one. Up the top, see display settings?
Yeah. Okay,
and then, try swap.
There, can you see it now?
Yep, that's
yes, we can.
Okay, wonderful.
We're away. Thank you.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, all right, so the next thing I wanted to run through was just a quick overview of the floodplain risk management process. So this is stipulated as part of the New South Wales government's flood-prone land policy. And there are a few documents that support that process, which is the New South Wales Floodplain Development Manual. And there are also some things in the Australian Disaster Resilience Handbook Collection, Handbook 7 we refer to it, that the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment have drawn elements from that National Handbook 7 into the New South Wales Floodplain Risk Management process. And essentially what this means is there's a framework for which councils move through, and it allows for the assessment of flood behaviour in addition to the identification of mitigation options. And the really key aspect of it is that the council is able to access funding throughout the whole stage, throughout the whole process. So including the technical investigations that are done, but most importantly through the concept design and implementation of the recommendations out of the plan. So a number of the options that are recommended out of this floodplain risk management study, council will be able to seek grant funding from the state to help to implement those. And so we're right in the middle there. It's really the green and blue stages that we're currently doing, and the recommendations will be that final purple stage. And so the studies move through, while we're undertaking the study under that framework, these are the key steps that we've done. So there was a data collection and model review. Like I mentioned, the flood study was done a few years ago. I think it was 2015. And so there's been some changes to the catchment, as well as some significant changes to the methodologies that we apply. We refer to it as ARNR 2016 or ARNR 2019. There was an update to it done in 2019. And so those methodologies have been applied to the representation of flood behaviour in this catchment. And that really, future-proofs the flood behaviour representation that council uses, at least for the foreseeable future. The last significant update of ARNR was done in 1987, so there's been a long time since an update was done. And so we're updated the modelling and re-established the design flood behaviour. And then through a process with council staff, engagement with the community, we've identified a series of hotspot locations where there's flooding issues, and identified strategies that could be applied at those locations to help mitigate the flood risk. And so the study, which is the document that everybody's had access to as part of the minutes, the agenda for this meeting, that really outlines the assessment that we've done. And there's a table in there which we call the plan, and that is the recommendations. And the next stage is consultation, but I'll talk about that at the end of my presentation. And at our last meeting, just under a year ago, we set out some project goals. And so the first one was assessment of flood risk. And so this is really about identifying those flooding hotspots. And like I mentioned, council's knowledge, so council's knowledge from community feedback, as well as through consultation. The flood study had also identified some hotspots, and reconsidering the flood representation as part of the updated modelling, we also identified some ourselves. So these are the typical mapping outputs that we look at. The blue one on the bottom here is really just, that's the depth of water across any area. We then combine it with velocity to understand how hazardous the water is. Is it fast and deep? Is it shallow and fast? Because that pops it into different hazard categories, and it means that it has different impacts on the areas that it's affecting. So we use all of that information to come up with a series of hotspots. So for this study area, there was 22 locations that were identified as having a flooding issue. So this might have been something that's reported or we identified as part of the study. And we grouped those into 11 hotspots, because what we found was, they were sort of all along the same system. So they really were part of the same location. So any strategy that we can implement there really needs to be an overall strategy that works for that entire, section of the system. So our next step was to identify and assess flood risk management options. These tend to fall into 3 different categories: flood modification measures, response modification measures, and property modification measures. The first lot that I'm going to talk about are the flood modification measures. And so these are structural works that we can put into the floodplain that physically alters the flood behaviour. These are the ones that we can use the hydraulic model to test. And I've just got a little bit of an overview here, because we don't just look at how they impact on flood behaviour. We also have to consider, what's the benefits that we get for the cost, so their economic merit, how hard they are to implement. Is there the ability for council to stage some of these to help spread the cost over a few financial years? We also look at impacts on the social elements. So do these options make the situation for emergency services better? Do they improve access? Do they impact or improve the flood behaviour for vulnerable facilities? Hazard awareness, disruptions, and support through the community is something that we'll get from our consultation stage. We also look at environmental, which just looks at flora and fauna and heritage impacts. And we have another category which is related to funding availability. Not really the structural work, but some of the other aspects that we might recommend, they may not have external funding opportunities. So we identify those. So it's very clear which options, I suppose, score higher. So we go through a process where we apply a score to each of those categories that I've mentioned. We call that the multi-criteria assessment. It's table 30 within the report that everybody's got. It's really just trying to give us an indication of a comparison between the options, so that you know, one that scores an 8 versus one that scores a 9. It just means that the one that's got a 9 is slightly better across those areas. It's not necessarily saying that option is, you know, definitely better than that one. It's really just a tool that we use to weigh up each of the options. Okay, so in total, we assessed 14 separate structural options, and so they included a number of elements. Through our assessment process and discussion with council, we found that 9 of those were really quite viable and have some related recommendation as part of this floodplain risk management study. But there were 5 that we found really didn't work. And so we've discounted those. I'll just run through those ones that we've discounted quite quickly so that the committee can see what we've looked at and why it didn't work. And then I'll run through the ones that are recommended. So one of the ones that we found didn't really work was the Gannon Park trunk drainage upgrade. So for this one, we noticed further up in the system there was some constraints on the drainage system. So we wondered whether if we substantially increase the capacity of the system through that Gannon's Park, because obviously it's not under dwellings or anything like that, so it's quite easily accessible, whether we could get improvements through the system further up. What we found that it really had a localized benefit. So it didn't achieve the outcome that we were trying to get from it. And so therefore this option was discounted. In a similar vein, we looked at what we referred to as the Mortdale trunk drainage upgrade. This was to try and reduce the impacts through that Mortdale industrial area. In a similar way, it really had a localized impact, and it wasn't significant enough for it to be made a recommendation. It's only reducing flood levels by about 50 millimetres. So for the cost and the inconvenience of having to upgrade this system, it doesn't have a broad enough benefit to be justified. The next one we had a look at was called Imana Place local drainage. We noticed here that the water really wasn't getting into the open drainage channel, so we looked at trying to increase the culvert capacity and the inlet capacity to get that water off the roadway. Again, we found that the works that we modelled just weren't able to remove that water. So again, this one was discounted. The next one was looking at an opportunity in the adjacent local government area, so in the Canterbury Golf Course. We wondered whether including a detention basin, so a detention basin temporarily stores water, allows the peak of the flood to pass through the rest of the system, and then allows the water to be released slower. We wondered whether one in the Canterbury Golf Course would allow us, would be an opportunity to help improve the flood behaviour. What we found is that the benefits were really quite localised. They didn't, what we wanted to see was really some benefits through this system, passing under Beverly Hills train station there. We weren't able to see that with this basin. So again, this one was discounted. The next one that we looked at was a drainage upgrade along King George's Road. So again, it was found to be quite ineffective for the surrounding catchment areas. So again, discounted. So that's been some really negative news. Now I'll move on to the options that are recommended. So there's quite a few here which are quite good and have been recommended for future works or assessments. So the Peakhurst Park detention basin is the first one. So this one actually really benefits the entire system. So downstream of Peakhurst Park, down through Clarendon Road, right down through the system. I believe in this one the benefits occur all the way down to Henry Wilson Drive. So like the basin I just described before, this basin would temporarily store the water and allowing the rest of the system some space. Additionally, this one this Headley Street, just adjacent, has some flooding. By installing a small bund, it helps to keep the flooding off that road as well. So this map I've got here is the change in flood behaviour. So the cooler colours mean an increase in flood behaviour, but the warm colours mean a decrease in flood behaviour. So within the detention basin itself, we get increased flood levels, but this would be a temporary increase in flood levels. But then you can see through the entire system, we get reduced flood levels, and there's quite significant reductions just upstream of Clarendon Road. This option also includes the acquisition of a property on Clarendon Road. It's currently an empty property that has a creek going through the middle of it. The option includes works to improve the conveyance of that creek system to couple with the entire scheme. And so the tool that we use to identify whether this option has the benefit is what we call the average annual damages. And it's a measure of an estimate of the dollar value of the impacts of flooding across a range of events. I think it's 14 million, I think, might be the average annual damages for the catchment. Sorry, I just don't have that number written down. I thought I had it. But and so this one gives us, it seems like a relatively small reduction in the average annual damages, but a BC of 0.33. So this is the benefit cost ratio. Normally, we would like to see the benefit cost ratio at 1. But in flooding, it's actually really, really difficult to get ones that the benefit cost ratio is 1. So 0.33 is not too bad. The other point I'll mention that the multi-criteria score, for this one, it actually ends up as 0. It doesn't mean that it has no benefits. It's just in the scheme of all of the options we've looked at, you know, it's on the balance of positive and negative, it's about neutral. Across all of those factors that I talked about. So the next one is another detention basin in Ruby Wing Reserve. So I think I did talk about this one at the last meeting we had. In consultation with council, we actually had to resize this basin because there's a very large sewer line that runs through the park, and so we've adjusted the modelling to make sure that this basin wouldn't impact on that sewer line, but we were still able to get benefits even with the reduced size. So again, those warm colours are benefits, and the cool colours are slight increases. Just through this area, the increases are around 20 millimetres. Oh, sorry, something I should mention, but just back on Peakhurst Park, the recommendation is to undertake a feasibility study and develop a concept design. So one of the requirements of the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment is if the capital works expenditure for a project is greater than $500,000, the option needs to go through a feasibility and concept design study. So that's what the recommendation is out of this study, but that's something that council can still seek funding to support that investigation, and it just moves it further along, you know, towards the ability to be able to construct. And so the recommendation is the same for this Ruby Wing detention basin, because the estimated cost is around $2.5 million, and so we get a slightly lower BC, but the multi-criteria score is slightly higher. So as you can see, that multi-criteria score is really not just about the flooding benefits and the cost. It includes a range of issues. So the next one is what we've called the drainage channel duplication. So this really extends right through the Beverly Hills area. There's an open drainage line that crosses under King George's Road and moves down towards just past Beverly Hills Railway Station. Now, we looked at broad scale duplication, so increasing the size of this drainage line, and as we've modelled it, really probably isn't feasible. But the idea behind this option is to identify for council that through the master planning that's occurring in Beverly Hills, that there may be opportunities to increase the channel capacity where possible that will allow some benefits to occur. And so, you know, you can see by broad scale widening the channel, we get some, you know, quite large reductions in flood levels through this area. But there are also some increases downstream. But the recommendation is that looking at this drainage channel as part of the Beverly Hills Master Plan and considering upgrade opportunities, that's really where this option is going. Okay, so the next one, you know, this is sort of at the downstream end of that option that I just talked about, the railway culvert under Morgan Street. So there's a lot of reports of inundation at the junction of these two channels on Morgan Street and inundation up Gloucester Road. And so, you know, initially we thought that this was being caused by the railway culverts. What we found was that it gave us a small benefit in the upstream system when we increased these culverts by allowing, you know, the flow to get through, but we also didn't really improve the situation at Morgan Street. And so in terms of a recommendation, I suppose the other points I should point out is that changing culverts under railway lines is incredibly costly, incredibly difficult to do because the railway lines have to be shut for the works to be done. So really the recommendation for this one is that the benefits are identified to Transport for New South Wales, so that if there's any ever some proposed works at these two culverts, that consideration of increasing their capacity is undertaken. It's really important for it to be documented in a plan like this, just so that it can be referred to if something happens to happen with one of the other stakeholders that are involved.
Aaron.
Yes.
This is Resultant from GRC. In terms of increasing the capacity of the culvert and also the upgrading channel, this has got an implication on the downstream side of it in terms of the flood level increase, property inundation, that kind of thing. So, and then while considering this kind of investigative option, we always be mindful on what sort of impact happening in terms of the downstream areas. Maybe it's in our area or in the adjoining areas. So
I'm sorry, I didn't. I'm finding it really hard to hear you. Sorry, what was the question?
Yes. In terms of the upgrading the culvert and also the upgrading the channel in double the capacity,
yes.
there could be a severe implication in terms of the downstream impact on flooding, because we are increasing the area and pushing more flow downstream. So these things need to be looked at quite critically in terms of the benefit and the adverse impact of the downstream environment.
Yeah,
I've got experience in the city of Parramatta. While we have increased the channel, we have increased the culvert sizes into the bridge, and that bridge already done by the trust, and then it has got enormous impact on the Fitzwilliam confluence area. The flooding was greater extent
Yeah. So if either the drainage channel or the culvert upgrade were standalone options, in my opinion, they wouldn't be recommended. But I suppose the recommendation is that these two items are to be considered when other things are occurring. So when the Beverly Hills Master Plan is more developed, I imagine there would be some flood investigation that's undertaken, and it would help to minimise those offsetting impacts. It's really the options are really just to identify that, you know, maybe something could be done here, but it's part of some other scope of work, and definitely those negative impacts are discussed as part of the report.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. No worries. Okay. So the next one is what we've called the Stony Creek Road upgrade. This one actually achieves really, really great benefits. What we found at Stony Creek Road was that once the water comes out of the open channel, it actually doesn't go back into the channel. It actually floods down Gloucester Road, so travels down Gloucester Road. So this is the one of the significant causes of inundation down that road. And we found by increasing the culvert capacity, as well as installing a small bund to stop that overflow down Gloucester Road, we were able to have really large reductions in flood levels. And noting there is some increases in this area, but we're talking 50 mils. Whereas we're getting sort of up to 250 mils benefit through Gloucester Road. So as part of the concept design and feasibility study, the balance of this positive and negative impact could probably be improved. But in terms of an option for increasing the inconvenience of the inundation on Gloucester Road, it's looking really positive. So like I said, the recommendation is undertake a feasibility study and develop concept design in consultation with Transport for New South Wales, because they would be the owner of the culvert on Stony Creek Road. This one we get a cost-benefit ratio of 0.6 or 0.59, so it's a much greater improvement than the other ones that we've looked at previously, and we get a multi-criteria score of 8. So this one is really looking like a pretty good option. The next one we've called Lyle Avenue Drainage Upgrade. And so it's through this flow path that comes down Lyle Avenue, crosses over Stony Creek Road and moves through the residential areas. We looked at increasing the culverts through this area. Now, some challenges with this option are that some of the drainage infrastructure is located in people's, in residents' private yards, often under dwellings and things like that. But what we found by just a small increase in the drainage capacity, we were able to get some reductions in flood levels. So the recommendation for this one is that undertake increases to the drainage capacity as the opportunity arises with redevelopment. So again, this is one of those ones where we're really documenting it and getting it in a plan so that as that redevelopment through that area occurs, these opportunities aren't missed to help have benefits to the flood behaviour. And again, the multi-criteria score for this one is -1, and that's probably really reflective of the fact that it's technically challenging to implement. So this one is also called the Morgan Street Drainage Upgrade, but this site is located more towards Kingsgrove Railway Station, as opposed to the Morgan Street option at Beverly Hills. So this one came about as a report from a community member that there's a lot of water always ponding outside their residence. So this one was really quite challenging for us. We looked at a range of options to help improve the flood behaviour here. But what we found was that even having a huge increase in the drainage infrastructure or having a huge increase in the ability for water to get into that drainage infrastructure, we weren't able to completely remove the small inundation that occurs on the road. And our model shows that the pipes within this area actually still have capacity. So this is one of those ones that I was talking about earlier that maybe is bordering on that stormwater issue. There's actually a raised, what would we call it, like median strip or garden bed within the roadway here. And potentially this is what is adding to the impacts of that ponding occurring. So for this one, the recommendation is to undertake a more refined scale assessment. So obviously our models are representing the whole entire catchment. You could actually do a much more detailed assessment by refining the model in this localised area. And it may be that just some minor reshaping could potentially achieve a positive outcome. So that's what the recommendation is for that one. Oops. So the next one is the Croydon Road Drainage Upgrade. So again, this is, I might show the flood map here. This is an area right at the edge of the study area, actually. This side of Croydon Road is actually the adjacent council area. But there's a location where the properties here are quite severely impacted by flooding. Water tends to build up before it overtops Croydon Road. So we looked at a range of things, including increasing the culvert capacity and inlet capacity right at Croydon Road here, and as well through the entire system. Now, this one has the same challenges as the Lyle Avenue option in that the drainage system essentially runs under properties. So this one, we looked at two scenarios. We looked at one where we had the opportunity to upgrade the drainage line, but then we looked at another scenario that if we just increased the inlet capacity, so allowed more water to get into the system, whether that could improve things. And we found that they actually had quite a significant amount of benefit. So the recommendation is to undertake a further feasibility study, but it's really about, as the opportunity presents itself through redevelopment, increase the pipes, but when the opportunity presents itself, increase the inlet capacity. So that's when roadworks and things like that are occurring. And this one we end up with a BC of around 0.25, but a multi-criteria score of 1. So on the weight of positive and negative, this one just sits on the side of positive. And so our last option that we're recommending is what we're calling the Croot Park Detention Basin. So there's a small park here. This is just to the south of that option that I was just talking about. There's a park here that's perfectly designed to become a detention basin. And what we found by creating this detention basin here was that we were able to get large benefits across a significant area. Again, we have the challenge with the pipe network here that it's difficult to upgrade, but by installing this detention basin, we found that we're actually able to get some benefits. The challenges of this one are that it's located immediately adjacent to an aged care facility, which we consider that to be a vulnerable facility. So through the design of this option, consideration of that facility would need to be undertaken. So just in terms of, having a conversation with the facility to make sure that this detention basin isn't going to create a significant danger for its residents. So again, while we get great benefits, we still end up with a multi-criteria score of 0. So that's, a neutral outcome. Okay, so there are all the structural mitigation options. And so the report then goes on to talk about response modifications and property modifications. Sorry, excuse me. In terms of the response modifications, because this is an overland flow catchment, the flood behaviour is typically quite short duration, as well as shallow inundation. So we don't have the ability to recommend things like large-scale flood warning systems to allow people to evacuate, because the reality is the warning time between the rainfall and the flooding doesn't allow for that type of response to occur. So within these catchments, it's really about educating the community to understand what the flooding means, trying to build awareness about the dangers of driving through floodwaters and, sorry, just lost my train of thought there, and how to read the indicators. So there is a flood warning recommendation, but it's really related to the listening to the Bureau of Meteorology severe weather warnings and understanding what those mean. So I'll just run through them quickly. Develop a local flood plan, including overland flow flood information. Now, this is a document that is jointly authored by the SES, and the local flood plans outline where there might be flooding hotspots, where response or recovery measures might be needed during and following the flood event. So the study has produced a large amount of this high resolution mapping, and that information can be really useful to include in these local flood plans. Another suggestion a recommendation that we've got is coordination between emergency services. So council and the SES both have responsibilities during a flood event, some related to road closures, some relate to dealing with calls for help. And so in another catchment area that I worked in, they had experienced a flood event, and what they said was it was really hard during the flood event because nobody knew exactly what their role was. And so this is a really great recommendation just during non-flood times for those agencies to be engaging with each other and talking to each other about what, you know, who's responsible for what. And that also helps with the community education so that the community understands who's responsible for which element during the flood response and recovery. Like I mentioned, we do have this flood warning recommendation, but it's about using those Bureau of Meteorology severe weather warnings, you know, to help with the community to understand what they mean. And in-house council can use the outputs from the flood mapping to try and determine where there might be, you know, if we know that there's going to be, you know, 200 millimetres of rain, what does that mean in terms of a flood map? And very quickly can look at one of the maps that we've produced and understand where those response measures need to occur. I've talked a lot about community education, so that's one of the key recommendations. The SES has a whole lot of great information on their website, a whole lot of pre-prepared brochures. So it's really just using that information to make sure the community really understands what happens when it floods in this catchment, who can I call if I need help, who's responsible for the road closures, all of that type of thing. And the final one is improvement to driver safety. So I think there's about 10 or so roads that we've identified through the flood modelling that have got significant hazard occurring on the roadway during a flood event. And so they're recommended to have some signage. It's typically those, you know, roads subject to flooding depth markers, just to, you know, it can be incredibly dangerous to drive through even a relatively shallow amount of water. So it's just to help to reduce the risk through that awareness strategies. Okay, so the final type of measures that we've looked at and recommended are what we call property modification. And these really relate to planning controls. So how can we change development as it occurs in the future to reduce its flood risk? And so this is done through council's stormwater management policy. In other councils, they're called development control plans. I believe council has some development control plans related to some other topic areas, but the one specifically related to flooding is called the stormwater management policy. And so a lot of this already exists within the stormwater management policy. So the recommendations are really about using the outputs of the study, in collaboration with the controls that already exist. So within the current stormwater management policy, there's a recommendation for what we call a flood planning level. Now, this is the level that properties need to have their floor level at in order to sorry, my phone just started flashing. I didn't know what was happening. The floor level, the level that the floor needs to be built at. And this is typically related to the 1%, and the aim of this is to reduce property damage for landholders. And so council's current document states that if you're in a low hazard area or somewhere with less than 150 mils depth of inundation, your flood planning area is the 100-year level or the 1% level plus a freeboard of 300 mils or 0.3 of a metre. Now, the freeboard is a factor of safety applied to the flood level to make sure that that level of protection is achieved. In other areas where the flooding is a little bit more severe, council's current policy recommends the 100-year plus half a metre freeboard. Now, this 100-year plus half a metre freeboard is pretty standard across the state. Half a metre is recommended or described as being the typical freeboard within that floodplain development manual. So this is a pretty standard approach that's used across a lot of LGAs in Sydney and indeed across the state. The other controls that exist, sorry, I was just trying to think how to describe this. Just recently, the Department of Planning has released what is called the flood-prone land package, and it talks about controls for things that are referred to as sensitive and hazardous uses. And these are the things that, like the vulnerable aged care facility that I spoke about earlier, or it might be a facility that has hazardous chemicals. And so ideally we get these uses out of the flood behaviour. And in a catchment like this, it's pretty easy to achieve that because, you know, we don't have this broad inundation across the area. So the recommendation is that these uses, which there's a list of those within Council's LEP, whether they should be located outside the PMF or at least have their floor level above the PMF so that there's no risk of damage or danger to the occupants or the materials that are present there. There's also a control related to underground car parks. They can become incredibly dangerous during a flood event. Vehicles can float around and injure people. So the recommendation is that car park entries have the PMF level. So essentially that means that no water in any flood event can get into that underground car park. The next one is what we call the flood planning area. So these are the properties to which those planning controls would apply. Now there's a few ways in which we can determine what the flood planning area is. I'll talk about that and these criteria that are listed here just on the next slide, but I'll just mention the last one I've got here. There's a recommendation that for non-residential buildings, so things like commercial premises, to allow what we call flood-proofing up to the flood planning level. And so what this means is that instead of having to build up the property to a higher level, the property has to be flood-proofed. And flood-proofing just means being able to have a floor material that's able to be hosed out if it's inundated, to have things like electrical points above what we call the flood planning level. It's really just to reduce that recovery time for a business following a flood event. I'll just talk about now the flood planning area. Like I said, we tried a few approaches. There's something that we call the traditional approach, which this is very specific to places like the Georges River. Essentially what you do is you take the flood behaviour and you stretch it out until it covers an area that would represent the 100-year plus half a metre. When we did that for this study area, which is represented here in this image, it covered a large amount of the catchment area, which, you know, if we refer back to one of my slides very early in the piece, I talked about Overland Flow really not impacting a lot of properties overflow. So in consultation with council, we felt that this was a little bit too extreme, and I've got the numbers here. We estimate there's probably around 18,000 properties within our study area, and you know, using these traditional approaches, you know, we were tagging sort of 2/3 of those properties, which is not acceptable and not reasonable for the community. So we looked at a range of other methods where, you know, we looked at a property and we checked how much of the property was inundated. So this got rid of some properties that only had a very small amount of inundation. Maybe they're located on the foreshore of one of the creek systems and only the very back of the property is inundated. So we went through a process, and the final criteria that we adopted was that any sort of little small puddles in the flood extent were less than 50 square metres were removed. And then we tagged properties if they had more than 10% of the lot impacted by a depth greater than 150 mils. We were going to stop there, but what we found that there was some scattered properties that really didn't make sense why they were added in, and so we added an additional criteria that if there wasn't another tagged property within 80 metres of that property in question, that property had to be tagged, had to be inundated by greater than 25%. So a larger proportion of the property needed to be impacted for it to get pulled into our tagging criteria. Now, this results in about 2,000 lots being tagged. But the point that I wanted to make here is this includes every cadastral lot in the study area. That includes things like parks and open space. We'll add to our report actually a breakdown of where these, you know, how many of these are residential and how many of them fall into that open space category. But it's, you know, just slightly over 10% of all of the properties in the study area, which is pretty reasonable. And what it means for those property owners is that, you know, they can have assurances that overland flow definitely won't get into their property because they're built at that floodplain level. This is the resultant map. And so the blue is the flood extent and the orange are the selected lots. Now, obviously we have some areas where, you know, a large lot is tagged because it's impacted on the corner up here. But you can generally see that the tagged lots, you know, fall within or near the flow paths. And so there is not, you know, these rogue properties that we're talking about. I've just got to zoom in on the next slide. You know, you can really see like there's these ones up here. Sorry, I'm just looking at the wrong screen. The ones up here, but this is really the flow path coming into this more larger system. And so we're pretty comfortable that we've represented the lots that may have some impact by overland flow, but that we haven't included any that aren't subject to flood risk. The other map that I've got here, as I mentioned earlier, the Department of Planning have introduced this revised flood-prone land policy, and that requires council to also identify every property within the PMS, and that's related to that sensitive and hazardous uses. So we've provided an additional map to council that identifies the properties that are within the PMS. So we went through the same process here. We filtered the flood extent and we selected properties only if they were tagged by 10% or 25% if they're an isolated property. So obviously it's a little bit larger area across the study area, but in terms of controls for these properties, it really just relates if the intended use falls into one of those sensitive or hazardous categories. Okay, so Council's stormwater management policies really got some great controls already in place. And so what we've done is really just make some suggestions of how these controls could be improved. And so there's very few, but one of them relates to the terminology used. In a few locations, the event terminology is slightly different. So just for clarity for people reading these documents, it's important that that's consistent through the documents. We also talk here about including the sensitive and hazardous uses that come out of that flood-prone land package. Again, just so that the local environment plan and council's stormwater management policy use consistent terminology. There's some, sorry.
Erin, sorry,
yeah.
it's
yeah.
Glenn here, if I might just interrupt you. I'm just conscious of the time. We do have a hard deadline at 6 o'clock.
Yeah.
So
okay, yep,
thanks,
all right.
Thanks, Erin.
These are discussed in more detail as part of the report. So if you have any questions, I'm happy to take questions via email on the recommendations for the planning policies. So the final stage of the floodplain management plan is to develop this strategy for the community. And one of the key points is that it is the community has been given opportunity to give feedback on the plan. So the idea is that the report will go on exhibition for a minimum of 28 days. to gather that feedback from the community and other stakeholders. Given we're in sort of an unknown COVID situation at the moment, our current proposal for Council and WMA Water have worked through these strategies together to advertise that the study is available for the community to read and give feedback on via the local newspaper, include some information about the study on the webpage and social media platforms. We'll be recording sort of a video where the community can listen to the key recommendations, obviously not in as much detail as we've gone into today. But yeah, there'll be a video and also there'll be some frequently asked questions. We're also going to provide the opportunity for community members to book and have a video conference with council staff as well as WMA Water representatives. And council also plans to formally notify all the properties that are tagged within the flood planning area of that tagging. So where to from here? The documents ideally will go on public exhibition. We'll receive and address any submissions. So this sometimes will mean that we look at additional options, or we maybe change some of the recommendations. It's really, we want to know what the community and the other stakeholders think. It's not just a process. We really want to hear what the community thinks. So that's a very important stage. Then we'll finalise the report, and then it will be adopted by council sometime in the future. That's it, I'm done.
Thank you, Erin, for that detailed presentation.
No worries.
Do we have any questions? Does anyone have any questions or anything we'd like to clarify? Anybody? Okay, no one. So there must have been quite a good presentation, so it's quite clear.
Yeah, just excuse me, Councillor. I got a couple of questions. Two questions for Erin.
Please go ahead.
If you just check on the chat, Erin.
I can't see the chat because I'm sharing my screen.
Okay.
Oh, okay. We've got plenty on the chat here.
Okay. I can't see it.
Can we ask Erin to make? Okay.
Would you like me to read out the questions, Councillor Hindi?
Yes, thank you, Watson. Thank you.
Thank you. So I might start at the first, I think, is a statement that the development of a comprehensive flood forecast and warning system across the Georges River catchment would address the response preparedness for the study area. This is one of the areas to be investigated in the Georges River floodplain risk management strategy. So we'll take that as a statement.
Yep.
The second is a question to Erin. Erin, does the study identify or recommend alternative planning controls at some locations within the study area based on sensitive developments and flooding risks, i.e. as per the recently released flood-prone land package?
Yes, the answer is yes.
The answer is yes?
Yeah, so that there's additional controls for sensitive and hazardous uses, which they're typically, those controls are above the 1%. So above the flood planning level.
Okay, and there's another question here. Erin and Andrew, does the lot layer used for flood tagging refer to the property layer? Please inform.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that question's asking.
Does the lot layer used for flood tagging refer to the property layer?
They're trying to work out how you actually tag the properties.
So we use the cadastral layer that was provided by council.
Okay, so that means probably it's the property layer.
Yeah.
And that's the end of the questions in the chat.
Is that the question that the answer that the question was asking? Whoever asked the question?
Yeah, just if I refer a little bit here in relation to this question. Sometimes, Erin, sometimes multiple lots could constitute a property. Like if you got a big block of land or property, it may have multiple layers. So because when you say that you tag all the property, so obviously these are related to lot boundary. So in that case, if you got a big block of land or property, how does it differentiate? tagging lot boundary between property boundary.
Yeah, so we were provided the updated cadastral layer, which includes subdivisions that might occur for things like villas or Tone's title or things like that. We got the cadastral layer. It was at the start of this month, I believe, and so it should be fairly representative of what exists. And obviously, you know, as properties are subdivided in the future, it's important to make sure that that flood tagging occurs across both those properties.
Okay.
Does that end up on the planning instrument or the old section 149?
Yes, correct. So the 10.7s,
Yes.
anyone that's tagged in the first map, not the second map, not the PMF map, but the first map, that ends up on the 149s.
Okay, good. No.
Or 10.7s, I think they're called now.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
there's one other question, Councillor Hindi. It's from somebody different, though. It's from one of our guests from Canterbury Bankstown.
Yes.
The study considered ARR 2016. Did you compare flood depth and velocity with ARR 1987?
Yes. So there is an entire appendix that considers the change in the methodology, and it includes a number of maps which show the comparison between the ARNR 87 and the current methodology.
Thank you.
That's all the questions in the chat, Councillor Hindi.
In the chat. Is there any further questions? I know it's hard. Yes, sir.
Just quickly one.
Yeah, sure.
Again from GRC. What set that are in the ARN 2069 and 87? What sort of changes did you receive? Yeah, I mean, is it flood level gone up or less?
I think they generally went down.
Because of the temporal pattern and that kind of approach adopted in the 2019.
Sorry, what was that?
Because of the new approach in the ARNR with the temporal pattern.
Yeah. So in this catchment, I believe it's really driven by the rainfalls. I'm just having a look at the map. Like I said, there is a map in the study, but we found the flood behaviour was sort of like about between 50 and 100 mils, I think is what it changed by. So not significant, but there was some changes, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Excuse me, did you compare in terms of percentage that how many percentage it was reduced in compare with just the 1987 era?
Yeah, look, it's Glenn here. Look, we might need to take some of those discussions offline. As I said, we've just got a few minutes to wrap up. So if we could just move to the recommendation, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Glenn. Sorry, if there's any question, I'm sure you can email them and you'll get an answer. We've just got a workshop at 6 o'clock and it starts sharply at 6, so we need to be offline. Okay, thank you so much for the presentation. Can I have a mover and a seconder that we adopt the recommendation that is printed in the committee report? I'm happy to move that. Does anyone else want to second it or even move it?
Happy to second it, Councillor.
Yes, seconded by, is that Sadak or somebody?
No, Aaron.
Sorry, Aaron, I'm sorry, man. It's very hard to work out with you. Thank you, Aaron, that's right. I'm happy to take my name off and put somebody else as the mover. Does somebody else want to be the mover?
Yeah, I'll be happy to move the motion. If you can write down my name, Sadik Zaman.
Yeah, that's Sadik. Yeah, I'd rather have, I mean, I don't mind doing it, but as the chair, I prefer other people doing it. Thank you, that'd be great. Moved by Sadik and seconded by Aaron. Is there any discussions? If there's no discussions, I'll put the motion. All in favour say aye. Against, declare that carried. There being no other business on the agenda, thank you so much for attending this afternoon, and sorry for we have to rush. I declare the meeting closed at 5:51 p.m. Thank you so much for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hindi.
Thanks, Roxanne.